Okay, hi. So thanks for all your emails and all your questions that you sent over and comments on the why does my dog do that. I got so many and it's so great to be here to answer your questions. So I said that I would pick one that I had the most questions of. So I had 5 barking questions. And hopefully I'll get time to do some other ones as well because I had some other great topics. But 5 people messaged in asking, why does my dog bark? So I thought it would be a good one to choose, seeing as most of you are really pulling your hair out at your dog's barking. So I have a barker. He is a Shih Tzu Pomeranian cross. And that is relevant because some dogs were bred to bark and some dogs were bred not to bark. So when choosing your dog, if you don't like noise, don't choose a dog that was bred to be an alarm dog, such as Shih Tzus. Okay, so let's talk about barking. What is it? It's communication at the end of the day, isn't it? The dogs are barking because it's part of their repertoire of communication. And most of dogs' communication is really, really subtle. And I guess that's why a lot of barking occurs, because we are really shit at seeing our dog's subtle communication. Like really shit at it. I'm doing this a long time, and when you see it, you're like, how did I miss that? Like, how did I miss that? Their communication is so subtle. And so quite a lot of the time, dogs escalate to barking because we miss all the signs. So their barking quite often is shouting. And especially in situations where you might describe your dog as a reactive dog. I think we're kind of trying to change language a little bit around that, because reactive dogs can get a bad rep, I guess, because they look aggressive and they look reactive, and like that idea that you meet a reactive human, we put them in a little pot and we go, hey, they're a bit of an asshole, they're very reactive, when in fact the truth is they're actually sensitive. Same with people. So reactive dogs that are barking at other dogs or other people is usually because it's a distance increasing behavior. They're using it to create distance between them and the stimulus that is making them bark, or that they are feeling unsafe around. And so if we look at barking in that context, when it's a scary bark, like a that kind of bark, that would definitely be your dog swearing and going, fuck, get me the hell out of here, get rid of that thing, what is that, I don't feel safe. And unfortunately, what ends up happening in those situations, if we don't have a handler or a guardian or a caregiver of that dog that is experienced in management of that kind of communication, is we the owner, we the guardian get frustrated. And with frustration, we can't think clearly, just as your dog can't think clearly when he's put in, or she is put in that position where she feels she needs to bark or shout or scream or swear at the person or the bus or the other dog that is coming too close for her. We also are in a heightened state of stress. And so quite often what we see is people reacting. They become reactive themselves, and how they become reactive is they start lead jerking, or they shout at their dog, or they push their dog on the ground, or they push their bum on the ground to get them to sit. And it's the only skill that they know how to do in that situation. Often humans, the guardians and the caregivers of dogs that I work with, are often embarrassed by their dog's behavior. And that is completely, I totally understand that. That is completely normal, because other people look at you like, what the hell? Like, what is wrong with your dog? Like, sort it out. Or you shouldn't have that dog. You should take that dog somewhere else. Or you should train your dog. I mean, I hear it all. And And when you have a dog that is barking like that, it can be embarrassing if we don't understand why our dog is barking and we don't understand the function of the bark. So it is so important to gain some understanding that the barking is, in effect, in that situation and in that context, in effect, requesting relief, requesting space, requesting, please somebody listen to me, I can't cope. That's what your dog is saying in that situation. So how do we stop our dog from barking? Depends on why the dog is barking in the first place. It depends on the function of that particular bark in that particular circumstance or context, if that makes sense. Okay, so some people emailed in saying, oh, my dog barks at everything. It's 9 months old. It barks at people. It barks at cars. It barks at anyone walking past the car. It barks at leaves. It barks at people coming into the house. And I would say, without seeing the dog, I would say just make sure that you run down those boxes and tick off those boxes. And if a dog is 9 months old and they're COVID puppies, because I think, so if we take the last 3 months, we've all been in lockdown. So at 6 months, the dog then stopped seeing all the things that it would have seen. Oh, if it's 9 months, 6 months. It would have stopped seeing all the things that it would have seen had we not been in lockdown. And so maybe is there like slight anxiety around seeing these people, and are things getting busier and busier? And we have those different fear periods in dogs when they're growing up, when that first kind of year of a dog's life, depending on the breed, will depend on when they have those kind of fear periods. And if anything happens to them in that fear period, it can stay with them for life. It's a period of time when they're extra sensitive. So when we take them away from everything and we don't expose them to anything, and there's just no exposure due to circumstances, and then we expose them, the dog will be like, what the hell is going on? So I think, like most of us, if that's the circumstance, it may not be the circumstance, but I think what we may see is like a huge hypersensitivity to the outside world, because the world has been so quiet. People have been quiet, cars have been quiet, dogs have been quiet. There isn't that much going on, and hasn't been for the last 3 months. So just like we're going to find it a little bit tricky, some of us might find it a little bit tricky going back out into the world and going into supermarkets and shopping centres and all of this kind of noisy atmosphere. Our dogs are going to feel exactly the same. And if they're barking, then they're communicating. And if they're communicating, we have to figure out what it is that they're communicating about. What's the function of their particular bark? In what context and in what situation? In order to find out how we can then stop that. And I think the question isn't so much, how do I stop my dog barking? Rather than, why is my dog barking, and how can I make my dog feel safe so that he doesn't need to bark? So remember, all training has to take place in the home. We can't train on location in the moment when the dog begins to show us the behaviour that we don't like, that we find unacceptable, or behaviour that is likely to cause damage to another dog or to himself. We need to train foundation behaviours at home, make sure they're solid, and then slowly introduce those behaviours into an environment with a little bit more distraction, and a little bit more and a little bit more as we progress through training programs. So remember, your functionality of the barking is the first key to understanding why your dog barks, and then how you can propose to stop your dog barking or change the way your dog feels about what's going on so that it doesn't feel it needs to bark anymore. Now, all that said, that's for dogs that are barking that are maybe slightly anxious or worried or need to increase distance. There are those dogs, like my dog, noisy bugger, who just bloody like to bark at birds. It's really annoying. He likes to bark at cows. The cows come into the field and he's like runs down going, rah, 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 rah. He loves it. He just loves it. Barking, some dogs just like the sound of their own voice. I know people who like the sound of their own voice. I sometimes get really tired of my own voice because I talk too much. So I get it. So that's just one aspect. Some dogs just like barking and there isn't any reason for it. You can definitely teach those dogs to stop barking because it's not emotionally driven. It's not coming from a place of stress or anxiety. It's coming from a place of, this is brilliant. Rah, 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 rah. Okay. So there's definitely things we can do with that. There are also cases, which I see a lot, of people, and I would say nearly all of my clients who have barking dogs have come to me going, but I've trained him really, really well. And then I watch their handling of the barking and it's usually all the same. It's usually really uniform. So what happens is the dog barks at something. And this happens maybe when they're a puppy, or it's just by chance. It's like a capturing of the barking. And so what happens is the dog barks at something. The guardian goes, Fido, come. Fido comes over. And the guardian goes, good boy, now stop barking. Well done. Feed, 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 feed. Or play and feed, play and feed. Let's go. And then the dog goes, oh, okay, so Fido, come is linked to me barking. And if I come after I've been barking, I'll get a treat. Genius. So what I see dogs doing time and time again is looking at their owner, going and barking, looking back and waiting for their owner to call them. And sure enough, their owner says, Fido, come. And the dog goes, yeah, it worked. And dogs are really good at generalizing. So they start barking at a bird and they get called in because it's nighttime and there's neighbors and they get called in, they get a treat. Then there's maybe, I don't know, like a bike at the same time that they're barking at a bird. And then they go, oh, bike, bird. Oh, it might work if I bark at bikes too. And then it might work if I bark at bikes that are being cycled by kids. So every time it sees a kid, it starts barking and then it goes, hey, feed me. So then we end up reinforcing and rewarding these barking dogs that actually wouldn't have been barking dogs had we not reinforced it at that particular time. And that can be easily trained back as well. That's easily reversed for the most part, if you have somebody that you can work with. So there's my little blurb on barking. I hope that's answered some questions for you. Any more questions that you have, please feel free to email them into me. It was great getting all your questions and reading all your questions and actually finding out that most of you had the same problem. Oh, there were a good few on digging and there were like 5 on growling. So we might do growling next. That was really interesting. We had a lot on growling. So remember, barking is communication. We've got to understand the functionality of the communication to be able to understand how we're going to stop the barking. And remember, it is communication that if we suppress, so if we stop the barking without understanding why the dog is barking, then we may end up with a different problem altogether, far more serious. Okay, so don't leave it. Contact a trainer, contact me. I work remotely, so I work all over the world. So please do get in touch if you need to sort of, if you feel like it's quite dysfunctional, then please do get in touch. All right. Hope I've answered some of the questions that you were asking, and I'll look forward to the next one. We might do growling. That was a good one. All right. Take care.